You're always with me in my head.
Hi, Michelle.
Take you with me in
Okay,
my heart.
yeah, so rather than these little nuanced comments that I make here and there, I thought I would just address it straight on, like what my problem is with NLP. And I realize that I am talking to a bunch of people who are mostly, not all of you, but most of you are NLP trained and practice NLP, many of you. And in fact, I trained many of you. So I do recognize this whole, thing that I'm stirring up here. And as I say, of course, not to ruin the ending, but I come back to this very, very wonderful aspect of NLP. But I have put together what I think is a really, really, really important questioning of what I believe to be a responsibility that those of us who are working with a tool like NLP and all its variants, what we probably should be asking ourselves so that we can feel really responsible with a fairly powerful tool, right? So NLP is a force to be reckoned with. So I don't need to define it. Everyone here knows what it is. There is this really, really powerful, effective way that NLP, in a way that is very unique unto itself, has figured out how to go into the unconscious mind and the conscious mind, and through integration and alignment, shifting internal representations to be able to allow somebody to actually have a pretty profound and different experience of a belief or a feeling or a thought or a concept or a behavior or whatever else it is that we're working with. And so as any tool, as anything that anybody learns a skill to use, I think it's really, really important that when we're using these skills that we have given it the respect that it requires. So I titled this The Trouble with NLP. So where I'm going to start, there's three main themes here that I'm going to be touching on, and they all are fairly distinct and different. And if I do this talk really well, they're going to come together beautifully at the end, and all in their sort of entanglement, the three of them are going to hopefully create a very different way of looking at some of the stuff that you already know, that you already have studied and practiced, and will give us just a really new perspective on how to approach some of the ways that we use this. So of course, NLP focuses on the relationship between our thoughts, our language, our behavior. And while it can be magical and spiritual and expansive and all those things, and I have experienced it all of those ways. Oh, yes, Sally, of course. Yes. But it does have a tendency, NLP, I would say, does have a tendency to be used more often for matching an individual to an ideal, a self-image that they believe is a better one than the one that they currently have. So I don't know if you would agree with that. So just think about that statement for a minute, right? So matching an individual to the image of themselves that is more appealing to them than the one that they currently have, right? I want to be stronger. I want to be more confident. I want to be in better health. I want to be more capable or make better decisions or trust myself or whatever, right? So it's this image of the self. And I think image is the right word because essentially that's the way that your brain can conceive of it, is to actually create an image of how they may be if they could change this aspect of themselves. And so I think more commonly, it's used to be a really effective tool to do these shifts. And so I think this is all great when you have a coach who's very, very thorough, very, very thoughtful, very considered, and really understands well what the person is actually trying to achieve and does all of the work. And of course, it can work really well. And I hope, by and large, I hope that's the experience a lot of my clients have had, and yours as well. The trouble is when NLP starts to push around neurology with little consideration of what the consequences of the new beliefs may be. So the three themes that I'm going to be speaking of, which are all sort of indirectly connected. But the first is this idea of limiting beliefs or beliefs. So we talk about limiting beliefs all the time, right? I mean, it's core. It's absolutely, essential and foundational for NLP practitioners to understand that beliefs are just beliefs. And we spend a long time, both in our practice, right, like with our clients and also in trainings and everything, talking about the structure of a belief. And really, I think probably in NLP groups, it's more understood than in your average sort of, coaching circles or just about anywhere else, that beliefs are in fact beliefs. They are just simply ideas that we choose to believe as truths, and therefore they can be changed. And so while we do tend to identify limiting beliefs as being somehow different from like the ones that we transform people toward, the truth is, of course, a belief is inherently limiting just by virtue of being a belief. And so I think that sometimes we forget that. I think that sometimes we think that we're moving away from limiting beliefs. And I do think that's problematic. I think that's sometimes why people who are using NLP as a tool for themselves sometimes are actually ending up feeling like what they're doing is unlimited. Unlimited. It's still limited. Is anybody else hearing an echo? That was weird. All right, I'm just gonna let it be. Okay, so the second theme is that we are not what we think ourselves to be. So it's really, really clear that we are not our thoughts, we are not our feelings, we are not our behaviors. I could go on and on and on and on. And while we aren't our thoughts and any of those things, we often identify with ourselves as if we are. So we often sort of recognize ourselves by the way that we can describe ourselves, which invariably has to be some collection of those things, right? It has to be some collection of like the behaviors and the choices and all of those things. But we're going to go down a little path momentarily that allows you to have just a different perspective on that, so that when we are talking about this authentic self, which is so separate and different from a self-image that we create, that we kind of know what we're talking about. And this is a little ethereal. This is anyone who's been reading Michael Singer, because I keep mentioning him and because he is popular amongst the masses as well. We're definitely going down Michael Singer's way of thinking of the self as something that is never the subject, always the observer. And then the third theme that we're going to talk about is also very Michael Singer sourced, but of course, ancient in its idea, in its sort of thought. But this idea that what we're continually doing, that we're believing that we need to make the world around us meet a certain set of conditions in order for us to be okay. So what we're, it's okay. What we're always trying to do day in and day out, from like the moment we get up in the morning to the moment we go to bed at night, we're essentially trying to make the world, control the world around us, to match it as close as we can to the way we like it, so that we can be okay. And it's fucking exhausting. Like, it's why being alive is so exhausting, is because we have, some of us have lots of them and others of us have even more rules about how the world has to be in order for us to be okay. And if you can't see the flaw in this logic, to recognize that it is this endless kind of like hamster wheel of needing the world to be, and by the world I mean like, whatever the world is, but by needing it to be something that just continually matches what we need it to be, it never lets us off the hook. Like, it just never ever allows us to actually be okay when it's so conditional. So these are the three ideas. Okay, these are the three ideas, and I'm going to go through them with I don't know, however I go through them. That's how we're going to go through them, and tie them together at the end with some level of sophistication here, maybe. So first, I'm going to read you a story. Once upon a time, in a small town called Willowbrook, there lived a young woman named Emily. From an early age, Emily was known for her intelligence, her talent, and beauty. She excelled in academics, participated in numerous extracurricular activities, and garnered attention wherever she went. As Emily grew older, she became increasingly aware of the expectations placed upon her. Family, friends, and even strangers admired her achievements and projected their own aspirations onto her. She felt a tremendous pressure to maintain the image of perfection that had been crafted around her. Driven by a desire to please others and live up to this idealized self-image, Emily pushed herself harder and harder. She tirelessly pursued success in all areas of her life, juggling academics, sports, and social engagements. She pushed aside her own desires and needs, constantly striving for external validation. But beneath the surface, Emily was struggling. The weight of maintaining the image became overwhelming, and she began to doubt her own worth. She felt like an imposter trapped in a life that didn't truly reflect who she was inside. As time went on, Emily's facade soon began to crack. She couldn't keep up with the unrealistic expectations she had set for herself. The pressure and anxiety took a toll on her mental and physical health. She realized that the self-image she had created was an unattainable illusion, an impossible standard that no one could live up to. The story goes on to say, with the support of a few trusted friends, Emily embarked on a journey of self-discovery. She started to question the beliefs and values that had shaped her identity. She learned to listen to her own inner voice, separate from the expectations of others. Through introspection and self-compassion, she began to let go of the needs for perfection. She embraced her vulnerabilities and acknowledged that it was okay to make mistakes, to have flaws, and pursue her own passions. She shed the burdens of the self-image she had constructed. She discovered a newfound sense of authenticity and freedom. She found joy in pursuing her own interests and connecting with others on a genuine level. She no longer sought external validation, but focused on cultivating self-acceptance and inner fulfillment. Okay. So this is a nice story. Good for you, Emily. But where I think that this is important for us to kind of take a peek is this sentence that says, the pressure and anxiety took a toll on her mental and physical health. She realized that the self-image she had created was an unattainable illusion, an impossible standard, and no one could live up to it. And I want you to think for a moment that she goes to see a coach at this point, right? So she walks into her coach's office and she says, you know, I've lived this life where I'm great at this thing and I've exceeded here and I've had all these, achievements that I've met and all this kind of stuff, but I'm feeling stressed and I'm feeling, overwhelmed and whatever else. A lot of the NLP practitioners that I know, and the way that NLP is very often taught, would be for her to recognize that they are not unattainable illusions, that her belief that she can't meet these unattainable goals, or her belief that the standards are too high. With some NLP practitioners, and I would suggest a lot of them, if she walks in there and her whole identity is connected to being an achiever, being an overachiever, being someone who can do these sorts of things, then chances are, when you say to her, wait a minute, when did you decide that you couldn't be the best at whatever? When did you decide that you couldn't meet this goal? When did you decide that you're not good enough to be the best, or whatever the case may be, right? There would be a real temptation if this person has demonstrated that they have all these talents and these capabilities and these skills and all of this stuff, that it's in fact a limiting belief for them to believe that they can't continue to achieve these heights, right? That they can't continue. And what coach or what practitioner is going to instead move in the direction of like, yeah, maybe we should lower the bar, right? Maybe we should like decrease the expectation. And who decides between you and your client about where you're going to use NLP to bolster a confidence that may be like waning, or where you're going to say to somebody, hey, you know what, this may not actually be how you're going to meet fulfillment or whatever, and how do you make that call? And so I think each of us, when we're meeting our clients, I meet it every single day. a client who comes into my office and will say, you know, I feel like, you know, I can't manage this. I can't manage working full time and coming home and taking care of my house. My house is a disaster. Well, in which direction are we going to go, right? Or in which direction are we going to go in terms of like, is it your belief that you can't do this and be okay and expand to include it all and find ways to do it and use your creativity and all that kind of stuff? Or is the belief more likely to be effective and bring you peace and all that kind of stuff if you learn to back off and figure out how to, I don't know, deal with that situation in a way where you're not taking it on? And so in a very, very, very simplified way, this is sort of what I'm talking about in terms of what NLP can do. Because what happens is that if our self-image, the greater our image of ourself, the more we start believing that anything that separates us from the image we want ourselves to be, that starts to make us feel like, with NLP, that it's a limiting belief that we have about ourselves. And so the gap starts to grow, right? So this is your actual self, or whatever we're going to refer to as your actual self. Here's maybe the beliefs you had prior to NLP about what you're capable of. And maybe you're operating kind of like here. If though, your expectation starts to sort of move up of like what's actually possible for you, and now you're operating here, the gap just grows. The possibility that you start to feel like you are increasingly limited by the beliefs and everything else that you have is kind of exponential, but you don't experience it that way. Because as we all know, the unconscious mind doesn't separate real from imagined, which is where we get these big, like, people start to see themselves and imagine themselves to be the way that they want to be, to match this self-image of themselves that they have, which usually has been conditioned by family, by society, by education, by environment, by television, you know, by whatever forces are sort of influencing where our self-image comes from. And as that as they get like hopeful sort of that they can meet that self-image, it can actually do this big lift, right? For a little while, we get these really, really big lifts. But the actual self, and again, we haven't quite defined that yet, but if that is not actually staying aligned with all of this, then now we end up with what we sometimes see happening after a couple of months, when the self keeps pulling like a magnet, it kind of pulls back to itself, right? So you did this limiting belief that I'm not comfortable in large groups of people. And you go to your NLP practitioner and you have this image of yourself because you know that being a leader is better than not being a leader, because the world says so, and your mom says so, and your husband says so. And so you know that inside of you, you must have these qualities of leadership. So you've gone to an NLP practitioner and they say, it's just limiting beliefs that you aren't comfortable in crowds enough to be this leader that you want to be. And then you go and you shift things around and you get all this confidence, but something's happening in the background where you're just not feeling right about something. But you know it's not supposed to be this crowd, because that would just be like you falling back into your limiting belief, right? And so now we have someone who's feeling a lot of stress and a lot of dissociation from the self. And there is an expectation though, and now there's like shame that goes along with it. And that's when there seems to be this sort of like crashing. Catherine, jump in here.
Yeah, I just want to, absolutely agree. And it's, where does the concept fit in of, I just don't want to. So it's not a limiting, like do you know what I mean? Like they may have the belief that it's not a limiting a belief. It's just now, I just don't want to. How does that fit in with the concept of belief? Because to me, that's a decision as opposed to a belief.
Yeah. And the question always is, you don't want to, why, right? You don't want to, why, right? If you don't want to because it causes fear, well, what is that about? Then you can get into this is the work that you want to do, right? This is sort of what I'm bringing up, where like NLP can be so destructive when it's not used in this really careful manner of looking at if you don't want to because you're afraid to. It's a move away from, it's probably something that you want to look at the source of what's causing that fear. And it very well could be some sort of like, limiting belief of some kind, some conditioning that could be overcome and can make you feel better and be better if you were to work through it. But if the sense of I don't want to is simply because it's not pleasurable for you, you don't enjoy it, or there's something else that you prefer instead. Like you notice that you really, really, really enjoy like small intimate groups, but you don't like these big groups. You don't like it. And it's not fear. It just feels like this is not my choice. That can often, that's when you have just a preference, right? So now if it is absent of fear, you have a preference for it, unless you have disgust, or if you have resentment, or if you have something else that is not actually fear, but it's some conditioned response to it, right? So if you have a client that actually says, like, it makes me feel so resentful when I sit there in these big groups, if I can speak to people one-on-one, then I'm okay. But when I'm in a group of 12, I just feel so resentful of all these people who are comfortable and I'm not. Okay, now we got something we got to work with, right? And now we're actually dealing with like something that has to be shifted. But if the person is able to have the self-reflection to say, this is just a choice, I don't like it, then it's something that, because often people will come to you and they'll say that, and then they'll say, but for my job, or, but my husband continually invites 55 people over to our house every weekend and I'm sick of feeling uncomfortable in it. They may ask you to go ahead and change that belief for them, right? They're going to ask for it. And this is where it gets really, really, really tricky, because you kind of have the tools to do it. Not kind of, you do have the tools to do it. But is it ethical? Is it okay to do that? Is it and can you decide to or not to? Right? There's this, without going deeply into the ethical stuff around it, but because you do know how effective this is, I think that there is a whole bunch of questions that you want to just make sure that you're asking and really, really, really paying attention to before you start going into these beliefs. The other side of this is you've got to understand that every limiting belief is only going to be replaced by another limiting belief. It's just that the next limiting belief may serve better, right? Like it may at this point in their life be a better belief to have. Right? So if somebody says, I believe that I am uninteresting. I believe that I am an uninteresting person. And you, of course, are going to support them in changing this belief to, no, of course you're interesting. You're a human being who has lived. Therefore, you're interesting, right? Like, so you move to the belief, I am interesting. It's a much better belief to have, for sure. But it also is inherent limiting. It still has all sorts of descriptors to it that are limiting in themselves. Right? I am an interesting person is not the expansive consciousness just being. Like this is a limitation to now I am actually, I'm going to live according to these conditions that say that I am an interesting person, and I am going to act in my life now according to a belief that I'm interesting, which means a whole bunch of things, right? And so you just don't want to be fooled that like now you're like your client was in like a closet and you've just like opened them into the vast infinite world. What you've done is you've taken them from standing in the closet that may have been really shitty for them and moved them into like a much bigger, nicer room. But it's still a room, right? There's still a ways to go. So I think sometimes that's really, really important to make sure that if your client doesn't realize it, at least you are very aware of the fact that what you're doing with them is you're really walking them through to the next stage of being, right? You don't want to treat it as though this is like, there, now you're done. I fixed you, you're done, complete, carry on, you want to definitely make sure that you've moved them to this sort of next level of better belief, and maybe do some poking around before you leave them there with like, what do you think life's going to be like now with this new belief? And don't shy away from it, right? You want to make sure that you walk beside them into this new belief to see what might they bump into, right? Like what are the things that this new belief is going to bump into? And I think sometimes NLP practitioners leave their clients with the idea that you had a bad belief, now you have a good belief, and you don't need to do anything more. And I don't mean to be derogatory here. I'm not simplifying it. And I'm not saying that all like NLP coaches are idiots, just like walking around doing stuff without any checks or balances or anything. I just mean that I think it's very easy to do. I know that I have done it, and I certainly did it in the beginning where it was very focused on like, let's go from a belief A to belief B, and you'll be better, And so I just think that it's something that is really, really worthwhile considering, and maybe get a list of questions. And I'm going to go on to these next two themes, which will, I don't know. But make sure that you have a good list of questions that you ask when you're dealing with limiting beliefs, so that you make sure you're doing best what your client actually needs. The other thing I want to say before we leave limiting beliefs, of course, is the idea of like conditioned beliefs. So we say it all the time, right? I'm not saying anything new here, but, we ask that all that page 10 stuff, like, is this good for you? Are you doing this for yourself? Is it anybody else's? But and I know that often, even though I think 1,000,000 trillion billion % that I am doing this for myself, that I am massively conditioned by everything around me, right? So I think that I want to be, I don't know, what's a good, like, universal kind of way of, like, I want to be, oh my God, I can't even think of anything, like, unaffected by the judgment of others. Or I want to be able to, when I feel others judging me, I want to be able to stay emotionally regulated or something like that, right? Like something that is hard to argue that there's anything bad about it. I don't know if that's a good one. Certainly wouldn't work for a whole bunch of the Enneagram types. But that's kind of my point, is that like, even when you feel like it's your own belief, you really want to remember just how deeply conditioned we are. And so do the work around these beliefs to make sure that you are not further enabling a belief that they have that is going against their nature. And I could go down a giant road here of like Enneagram and Myers-Briggs, and, I have lots of time to do that at another time. But that'll be, I use the old example, I've used it many, many times, but the idea of like extroverted coaches that sometimes believe that they're introverted. They don't understand their introverted clients. They really genuinely don't understand that, like, the choice to spend time alone and the choice to stay quieter in situations, or the choice to, whatever they call it, to actually, have the experience inside their brain be more real to them than the experience that is outside of them. For some extroverted coaches, that is so hard for them to believe that that is an okay belief. And because we live in a world, and I don't mean to pick on extroverts here, but because we live in a world that is dominantly extroverted, it is really, really common for people to say, get out of your head and get into the world, which to an extrovert is very appropriate, very, very appropriate. If an extrovert has been hurt and retracts and withdraws into their head, they do need some help and some guidance and some coaching and some, trauma work probably, and all the other things to get outside of their head. But for an introvert who by definition experiences the highest form of reality inside of themselves, they cannot have somebody, because the world keeps telling them that that's not good enough. The world keeps telling them that that is not actually as good as the experience that is external to them. They don't need a coach who also starts reinforcing to them that, you're not really living until you're doing it out there in the world, right? When an introvert is very much alive right inside their head very often. So we've just got to be so careful with these limiting decisions and limiting beliefs and the way that we're approaching them, and not using NLP, which is so powerful, in a way that we're actually pulling somebody away from the self and into something that is more constructed and is actually going to cause more difficulty in the end. Okay, so my second theme. So this next thing that I want to talk about is this idea of the self not being the thoughts, not being the feelings. Almost everything that we identify as is not actually ourselves. So I'll give you two kind of metaphors that I want you to think about. So one is, and I apologize if you've heard me say this, but one is the idea that if you, the you that is you, had been born on the other side of the world to a different family, and you grew up in a different house, and you had different friends and different schools, and everything around you was different. I'm asking the question now, do you think you would have the same thoughts and the same feelings that you have today? You wouldn't, right? There is no way that if I had grown up in like a, hut in the middle of Africa as a sheep herder, that I would have the same thoughts, even remotely the same thoughts and the same feelings and the same behaviors as I have today. But would I be the same person? Of course I would, right? When I look in the mirror and I look at my own eyes, there is something that would stay exactly the same, that I would recognize the same way if my life matched in no way the thoughts, feelings, behaviors that I have today. And what the heck is that? Like, what is that? What is that you? Like, when I looked in the mirror and I was 6 years old, not a single part of me was the same. Yeah, spirit. Not a single part of me was the same as it is today, right? The cells were different. I was a different person. So all of these identifiers, but how do you identify? Because what we normally identify, and not to be, and I'm, again, some of you may be all there. I'm not. I'm working my way there. But the idea of like spirit or soul or essence or source or whatever it is you want to call that, like absolutely indescribable, I'm going to call it essence of yourself, that actually wouldn't change, that would be the same no matter whatever in your life had changed. The reason we can't describe it is because, of course, we need our brain to describe anything. And our brain is not actually what we are. Our brain is what we focus on. Our brain is what we're paying attention to. It's not us. It's the mechanism. It's the machine that we have that pays attention to certain things that over time we start to identify as us. We do start to identify our thoughts as being us. We do start to identify the emotions that are caused by those thoughts to be us. So there's a very, very good, those of you that have read Untethered Soul will know this, there's a very good analogy of our minds being this idea of walking into, if some say there was a big old warehouse and there were no lights in this warehouse. And if somebody gave you a flashlight and said, okay, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to go into that warehouse. I need you to tell me what's inside of that warehouse. And they gave you the flashlight. And then you walked inside and you flashed the light on something and you see this like big old owl and a couple of boxes. And then you walk out of the bed and somebody says to you, what's inside the warehouse? You would answer, well, there's a big old owl and some boxes. And you would be absolutely right, right? That was your true experience. That is exactly what was in there. Now, if they give the flashlight to somebody else and that person walks in, but they stick the flashlight over there and they go, oh, there's like a fighter jet in here. And they walk out and they say, well, what's in there? And they say, there's a fighter jet. And of course, that is their true experience. That is exactly what they experienced in there. There is no way for them to know that they were experiencing the same thing, but different things. It's not explainable. Like, there is no piece of logic that can actually make one of those experiences realize the other experience at the same time. You know what I mean? You can work it out logically in your brain, of course, cognitively, but you can't actually have an experience that allows one of those to inform the other. And so what we get confused about all of the time is that whatever we are the flashlight. We are not the thing that the flashlight is lighting up. We are the flashlight. We're not the owl, and we're not the fighter jet, but we think that we are. Because what our brain is doing is it's focused on something. So I'm sitting here looking at you guys, and I'm having that's what my flashlight right now is looking at. And my flashlight is looking around for like all this information that I think I can share with you. And I have all sorts of like personal relationships with you guys. So like, that's a mix of emotion. And then there's like my own confidence in myself. Like, there's all this shit that's going on that like these flashlights are flashing at, right? And every one of them feels exactly like it is me. I feel like that is me. Like, I feel like the thoughts that I'm having right now, the words that I'm having right now, and the feelings I'm having right now, that all feels like it is me, but it's not. It's the subject of what I am actually paying attention to. And so the idea of being able to hold this space is very common to how we hear people talk about meditation, right? Be the observer, get above yourself, watch yourself, which is all cool. There's nothing wrong with, I mean, obviously there's only great things about meditating. It's what we do. It's a great way to, you know, shut your parasympathetic down. It's an awesome way to sort of exercise that muscle of like getting outside of yourself. Catherine's got a strobe light in there. Me too, Catherine. Me too. So the idea of this is not new. I am not presenting anything, nor am I under any illusion that this is a new concept to you. But what is new is the idea that you can have your meditation and you can do that exceptionally well. But if when you're done your meditation, whether you meditate for 5 minutes or 5 hours, when you're finished your meditation, if what you do is drop back into your body and start believing again that you are the things the light is shining on, rather than remembering, not in your meditation, but like throughout your day, in your conversations, in your choices, as you drive your car, that you are actually the flashlight, and disidentify with the subject of what you're looking on, and instead, not to do anything magical. This is not even really spiritual, guys. Like, I mean, it is, but it's also not. It's just kind of a really, really, really deep truth about the experience we're all having here. And so it's not an easy thing to hold, but it is something I love so much. I was listening to Michael Singer a little while ago, and he said, you know, all these people come up to him and say like, oh, I went on this retreat and I had the most exceptional experience. And he said, or any of you that have listened to him, he's the craziest guy to listen to. And in his way of saying it, he said, you know, I don't care what kind of experience you had. I care about your state of being now. What is your state of being now? Because who gives a shit about where you were yesterday? How is that relevant? It's over. It doesn't matter. It is useless to you if it doesn't change your state of being now. And so what I'm interested in is, what is your state of being now? And are you identifying with all these feelings and all these thoughts that are like coming at you and getting all grippy and then like sticking inside of you, and you're giving meaning to them and you're, you know, getting all worked up about them? Or are you able to notice all of this and recognize that this idea of you being the person who is having this experience and actually get a little bit delighted, no matter the experience of what you're learning, what you're noticing, what you're observing, and how you can use that, which brings me to my third theme. So this whole concept of the self being something that is not what we think it is, that is very, very, very different from that. It's the things, it's the thoughts that we have. If you're shining the light on this thought that says, you are terribly untalented, you are really, really bad at making friends, and you're really terrible at, if you're shining your light on that, my question would be, why do you keep shining the light on that? Like, that is a very stupid thing to do. Shine a light somewhere else. It makes you feel bad to shine the light over here, so shine it somewhere else. Focus on something different. And this is not sticking your head in the sand. This is not like denying something that is true. And this is just recognizing that none of it is true. And you have the choice to have the experience inside of you that you want to have, simply by choosing what you would like to pay attention to, what you're going to shine the flashlight on, because everything is there inside of you, right? Every single one of us has something lovely in there. And the actual light, the flashlight, the self, the thing, it's always okay. It's like as neutral can be. It's just being. It's just like consciousness. It's just oneness. It's just source. It's just like whatever it is. But I promise you, it does not have really strong feelings about Donald Trump. It does not have really strong feelings about whether you like this smell or don't like this smell. That's something that is important. And I'm not dismissing any of this. I'm just saying the relationship to it is different from that being you. That is the experience that you're having. And the you that is noticing that experience has a sense of it. So it brings me to this third theme of what we try and do. The truth is, we're always okay in here. The flashlight itself is just light. It's just choosing what it wants to light up. It's always okay. We just need to let the things go that are causing the unpleasant feeling inside of us. And so if you think about what we're doing, so we basically start to have these preferences. We basically start to say, I really like it when my coffee is, nice and hot. The feeling that I have is like this warmth. And then the thought that I have is like, oh, this is nice. And then the feeling I get is this like pleasurable feeling of happiness. And I like that. So I'm going to go ahead and try and get that as often as I can, which makes perfect, absolute sense. What starts to make less sense is when we have a negative experience and the experience itself causes us to believe that we're not okay. And so we start to create a sense of control around us of like, I don't like that experience. That experience over there makes it unpleasant in here. Because when I shine my flashlight over there, that sucks. It makes me think bad thoughts and it makes me feel bad things. And so it makes me feel like I'm not okay. And so I need to avoid having that experience at all cost. And I need to try and create these experiences over here. And these experiences over here are the ones that are going to make me be okay. And we spend our whole entire life walking around trying to have an experience that makes us think that we need these experiences to be okay inside. When the truth is, we're always okay inside. If we could just start watching these things go on around us, if we could watch them be the momentary thing that we're paying attention to, and start realizing that we're actually always okay inside. Why do we focus so much on the things that are causing us to believe that it's not okay in there? And this is the exhausting part of if you would stop, if you're actually okay. So if you can go inside and actually start to be okay, So this means you start letting go of all the things, just like the work that we all do. You start letting go of the things that you're attached to. You start letting go of needing things to be a certain way in order for you to be okay. The more you can let go of that, the less you need the outside world to be okay for you to be okay. So essentially, the more you try to make the outside world be responsible for you being okay, the further you get away from actually paying attention to what actually makes you okay. Is everyone following? So the better you get at saying, so I'm going to throw some types of people under the bus here. The more you are, say, a perfectionist, the more you have rigid rules, the better you are at influencing and controlling the way people behave around you. The more rules that you are putting in place for the world around you to go according to the way that you like the world to be so that you can be okay, the less likely you're ever actually going to do the work inside so that you can actually be okay. When the world feels shitty outside of you, also not awesome. I'm not by any stretch saying like, so go ahead and, create chaos in your life so that you can work on being okay. But think about like, if you've just learned how to be a rock climber, your conditions are pretty friggin' important, right? Like if I'm on like day 3 of rock climbing class, it's really important that there is not a rainstorm outside. Like I cannot have rain slamming at me and like thunder going. I'm not good enough in my craft, in my skill, in my centered being to be able to handle that. I can't have people yelling at me. I can't have like super weird like angles and stuff on it. Like I've got to have very, very specific conditions that I have controlled to feel like I'm okay, right? And to actually be okay. I have to have a very, very controlled environment. Now, when I'm actually an extraordinary rock climber, when I get to the point when I am truly, truly good at rock climbing, it doesn't matter so much, does it? Thunderstorm isn't going to throw you off. The rock can get all weird on you and you've got all sorts of ways of handling it. You don't need to be so controlling of the environment. You don't need to set up the conditions around you for you to be okay. Because you know that inherently you're going to be okay. You are so good that the conditions around you can go pretty awry and you're still okay. I want you to imagine your life like this. If you need all those conditions in place for you to be okay, you're not really okay. If you can say to yourself, even when there's a fucking like thunderstorm and there's lightning and shit starts moving over there and whatever, it's not awesome, like it's not as pleasant as a beautiful sunny day climbing or whatever, but I'm okay. I'm okay. Not because the conditions of my life, not because I have made the conditions of my life okay, but because I am truly okay. And I promise you, when you can help your client, if this is your singular goal with your client, and stop enabling their request from you to make the conditions better, now you're moving your client. And NLP, as much as I love NLP, and I do, and I see its beauty, and I see its magic, and I see everything, and I see people get better because of it, but NLP is also exceptionally good at making our conditions better, isn't it? And I think as a coach, you have got to keep this in mind. If you have just helped your client become even better at controlling the weather and all the guides around them and making sure everybody around them is quiet and making sure that everything is perfect, I gotta tell you, and this is just my own whole thing right now, I don't think you're helping them that much. I think you're making their conditions better. And so, all that said, if I have a novice rock climber and I launch them right away into like, well, you don't need the sky to be clear. You know? Here's a thunderstorm, you know, like that would be terribly irresponsible of me as well, right? You've got to meet them where you are. So if you are working with a novice, if you're working with somebody who's come into your office and said, you know, I'm a nervous wreck and I need my anxiety to go away or whatever, and you recognize that like this person is not ready right now to bypass the conditions and to jump directly into the fire, you know, so that they can handle everything in the world, then help them make the conditions better, right? Like help them make themselves be able to handle this situation better and that situation better and everything. But in order to help somebody grow, if I have been working with somebody for 2 years or longer, or if they're at a place in their development where I start to sense that they're looking for, I better be starting to work on them and helping encourage them to stop trying to control the conditions. Does that make sense? So that's kind of where I am. The time is 8. Oh, look at that. I'm actually going to end at an hour tonight because I feel like maybe I would be beating a dead horse if I went any further. But I just wanted to get that out because I feel like it's a very difficult concept. Lee's here, and we're working on some stuff. And one of the things, Lee is also deeply into Michael Singer's stuff, and what we've sort of been talking about a little, and what this has been on me for a few years now. I'm like, I think I picked up my first moment of this probably like 3 years ago. And it's been haunting me. It's really actually been difficult for me to figure out, how do I reconcile this idea of like, I kind of at my core want to get to the point in my own life where I surrender to everything, like where I stop kind of needing anything to be anyway, except for exactly the way it is, and just handle it, right? Like I want to actually stop efforting, which is never the case, right? It's not like I don't actually want to go sit in the middle of the forest and just like wait to see how long before I die. Like it's not that I understand there are some flaws to this whole thing, but the essence of it is really, really what I believe. I really, really believe that I want to be surrendering more, surrendering to just letting things be and trusting that like I am okay. I don't need things to be a certain way. And yet I am an NLP practitioner and I believe, and my life has been changed because of NLP, and I can sort of justify it in this, like in the beginning, it was really important for me. It's 10 years ago, right? I was a fool. I needed a lot of stuff, conditions changed around me so that I could start to do this other growing, right? But I also feel like there are some ways. Oh, and maybe that's actually where I will go just in these last few minutes, because I did write down some neat, I wanted to make sure it was very applicable. But it did seem like a conflict. How can I, on the one hand, be saying, master your mind so that you can have like, I mean, listen to like, you know, Tony Robbins, and listen to the Stephen Shea and Tad James and like all these people that are like, just decide what you want the world to be and you will manifest it. And you'll like, there is such massive power behind this messaging of like, master your mind. Well, who the hell is the one mastering your mind? Let's talk about that for a minute, right? Like, you know, I'm at the point where I sort of feel like anything that is saying like, have power over your mind makes me want to like run away screaming. And yet I don't think it is actually a conflict. I do think that the work that we're doing, certainly timeline therapy, certainly core transformation, wholeness, and a very, very, very effective, considered use of submodality shifting and anchoring and strategies and all of that kind of stuff can really support both. And again, of course, you need the tools that are going to meet your client where they are if they're not quite ready for the conditions to be, you know, changed. The beliefs that would support us then are the single beliefs, right? So beliefs like, I am love. I am peace. These ones that are singular, I am strength. I still think those are good beliefs, right? Because if you're going to be that expert rock climber, like if you're going to be in that space where you get to say, where you finally get to say, you know, I don't need my husband to be a certain way or say things a certain way for me to be okay. I can just be okay and notice whatever I'm noticing and make choices about where I prefer to spend my time. Not because one is hurting me in the traditional sense of that and one is not, but because I want to enjoy my life, and there are definitely preferences. Everyone still has, you know, you are a soul, but you are also flesh and blood that has preferences. You still have the conditioning of, you know, you're not going to be able to float above all of your conditioning and get, you know, maybe you will, but like not yet. Safe to say. So you're still going to have these preferences and stuff. So you're still going to make choices. If a woman, by the way, came to me and said, like, my husband is cracking me over the head with a, you know, every night and I'm getting abused, I am not going to stand there and say, well, if you're really okay, you could handle anything. Like, right? Like, there's no stretch here that will allow you to be abused, mistreated, that will allow you to put up with circumstances that you shouldn't put up with or anything like that, right? You don't become this passive, like, everything's fine. What happens is that you remain okay as you recognize that you have the strength to make the decision that you certainly don't want to spend your life in an abusive situation that is just simply unpleasant. It is not fun to come home to somebody who treats you horrible. And you're not leaving because you can't handle it anymore. You're leaving, you're fine, and this ain't fun. I'm gonna go find somewhere where I feel better. So that needs to be really deeply understood as well, right? It needs to be a very, very considered choice of where you want to spend your time, your energy, your preferences, right? Somebody, you know, could say to me, well, Tara, if you believe that, go become like a you know, go collect recycling for your life. Well, I don't want to. Back all the way back to Catherine's point. I don't really want to do that. If I had to, if the world was exploding and I became the recycling person because, you know what, like, then I would, and I hope that I would be okay, and I actually believe that I would. But given I have choices, I'm going to choose to do something else, right? Like, so you want to be really, really, it's about this sense of at your core, you're okay, and your decisions are coming from somewhere other than you not being okay. Sally.
It sounds, there's a book by W. Tim Galway called Inner Game of Golf, Inner Game of Tennis, Inner Game. And it sounds like, as you're talking, it sounds like it's an choice of inner peace. The kind of like simple abundance of joy internally, accepting other people, you know, whoever they are, whoever they want to be, that's their choice too. But by choosing joy, the perception of this simple abundance that lives inside, you just deal with the shit that comes, and you can still be joyful.
I couldn't say it better. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Joyful, or whatever word you choose, right? Like joyful, or for some people it's going to be like peaceful, or for some people it's going to be loving. And for you, because you are, you know, an evolving thing, it's going to change, it's going to move, it's going to, yeah. And I'm with you, Sally. My word is joyful. Like, and the thing is to work on is to be able to do this in real time. Right? It's one thing I've gotten pretty good myself, like personally, at like getting there, like I can work my way there, right? So if a situation happens, I'm really good at like figuring out how to remember that, like that, you know, to do all the stuff. Harder when it's happening, right? It's a lot harder sitting at the family dinner table and all the shit's going on, and actually in time be able to remember that I'm actually okay. I'm okay if I choose to be okay. And even this thought that I'm having, like, oh, interesting, I just called my sister a bitch. interesting. I'm just going to let that move through because that is not me. That is just a thought that I just had, that this, like, that is what the flashlight just noticed. Like, oh, my reaction to that was like, you know, but I can just let it go. Oh, so do you want to do an exercise? Do you want to do a 2-minute exercise? What did you call it, Catherine? the light,
The strobe light.
Okay, this is the relax and release. So just try this if you want. Literally, this will take 1 minute. So this is how you actually do this. So with all of that like theory and everything I just delivered, the actual practice of doing this is to actually relax and release it. So you say to yourself, so everyone right now with your eyes open or closed, I don't care. Think of something that irritates you, okay? So think about something that irritates you, just irritates you. And as you think of that, those of you that are on camera, I'm actually going to see you move in one direction or the other as you lean away from it. So just concentrate for a minute on where that irritation is. And I want you to lean your body away from the irritation. And as you lean away from it, just fully relax your body, like just relax that feeling and actually release it as you move away from it. Notice that that was never actually you. It's seriously quite funny. That was never actually you. And now move back into the space that you just were without it. And open your eyes when you notice. Sally, yeah, did you notice?
Not my irritation.
Sarah, did you notice? Yeah. It's wild. Yeah, Sarah?
I leaned away from the irritation of the messiness in my house that always gets to me. And it felt really good.
Yeah. You know, it's so neat. You guys all moved in different directions. I wish I had the gallery. I just figured out how to not do gallery. And now I wish I had it because you all sort of at the same time moved in different directions. But it's really evident, right, where it is to just sort of move away from it. And it's like you give it space to just keep flowing. So it's so silly that we get it like stuck. And then it flows, and then you relax, you release it, and then you notice it. And usually for me, and I mean, I have a bit of a nature like this, but usually for me, it just ends up being funny to me that like I was identifying as irritation, like literally. And that it was never me. I would like that. It's so clear to me when I'm able to do that. And I'm not, you know, I am absolutely a novice at this point, but like being able to do that for real allows me to realize that it has very little to do with me. It's just a passing thing. And I can choose to like re-engage it, but usually, why would I? Because even if it's something worth addressing, even if it's like, oh, my son is using language that like irritates me, I might need to address it, but I certainly don't need that irritation there to do something productive about talking to my son about cleaning up his language. You know what I mean? Like it's always, almost always just a like, that is unneeded and not me. But we're just so conditioned to believe that our emotions and actually taught, right? Your emotions are your emotions. You're allowed to have them. Well, for why? For what? Okay, I'm stopping there. Questions? I'll keep it recording as long as we're talking about this topic, and then I will stop the recording. And if anyone wants to ask me about like client stuff or whatever, then I will stop the recording so it's confidential. And anyone new to this tonight, anyone who's coaches, this is an opportunity for them to bring anybody who's working with, we never mention names. We keep it very confidential, but if you just want to ask me advice on anything that you're dealing with right now, then we use this opportunity to answer questions. But first, if anyone has anything to say about this whole concept. Paul. Oh, good.
Hey, so I love this talk. You are one of the first people, other than my wife and I and a handful of others, who phrased it in the way that you have. And a while ago, I asked a particular question regarding free will. And the answer that I got from the person whose opinion matters to me was, you have free will, but your body does not.
Oh, interesting.
And I think that's in line with the theme that you were talking about. Thank you for that reaction too.
That's so interesting. What was your reaction?
It was like, oh, but it was totally in keeping with the idea of like, I am not my body, I am not my brain, but that we have programmed wherever we are born and under what conditions, our body and brain is programmed to do things, to respond to sounds and sights and behaviors and vocalize and language, but that's not who we are. We are something different. And so our body actually doesn't have the free will because it is a programmed machine that we reprogram through, literally NLP is about programming, and we're changing that program that our bodies are responding to, but that is not who we are. We are different. We are above that. And I was like, wow, I like that distinction. And I want to share that as an extra thought.
Yeah, it's so neat. I heard someone just recently describing how our breath is one of the only things that is actually like a bridge between our conscious and our unconscious, because it's one of the only like bodily functions that we can control consciously. So like you can't just consciously tell your liver to stop doing whatever your liver does, right? Like you can't go into the body and say like, I would prefer now, bladder, that you do this, right? Like, you know, in the greater concept of healing, of course, there's we could spend days, and we do, talking about healing and how much control you can have of the body in that capacity. But in terms of just like, like free will, we don't really, and yet the breath is actually an internal process, right? That we do have conscious control over to some degree, but it also goes unconscious, right? We have both conscious and unconscious control over our breath, which I think is why it's so fundamental in like accessing our nervous system and our parasympathetic and everything. But that's such a nice idea of like, where we have choice and where we don't, and where we have free will. I love it. Thank you. Anybody else want to comment? Yes, heart rate too. You're right. Yeah. So our heart rate is something that if you can practice, you can certainly learn to change your heart rate. It's probably a few more things, but it's so neat. Okay, guys, I'm going to turn the recording off now.